Well, Governor, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your strong leadership always in Austin, but especially this week stepping in as acting governor and dealing with this crisis and doing so with the professionalism and attention to detail you always bring to serving the state. I want to start by really commending all of the officials we have at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, the first responders. For Texas, living across on the Gulf Coast, I grew up. I'm a lifelong Houstonian. Living on the Gulf Coast, this isn't our first rodeo. Hurricanes are a part of life. We've grown up with them. And one of the consequences is that we have a team that knows how to deal with them. Judge Henry, you and I have worked side by side repeatedly in hurricane after hurricane, and thank you for the effectiveness that you always bring to emergency response and then to rebuilding. The first step in every crisis is always saving lives. It is first responders risking their lives to get out and keep people out of harm's way. And we've seen the fatality count right now is 7 from this storm. This was a serious storm. I was just earlier today in Jamaica Beach, was visiting with a woman who was in her home when a tornado struck the home and pulled the roof off her home. And she called 911 and she said in less than a minute, the Jamaica Beach police were there and got her out of her home. Now that's terrifying to be in your home and have the roof pulled off. And I went and saw it. It was the tornado had thrown it across the street about 100 yards away from the house. But it was a 1-minute response time for her. And I'll tell you, our first responders in Houston, sadly, one of the fatalities we saw was a civilian employee of the Houston Police Department who was coming in as a first responder, coming in because the city had asked him to be there to help people in crisis, and he came in and drove into an underpass and tragically drowned. And so we lost someone working with the first responders. We're grateful for the courage and heroism of the firefighters and police officers and EMS and everyone who goes in and pulls people out of harm's way. The next stage is moving forward, and as Governor Patrick said, dealing with power. We had, when this storm left, 2.7 million people without power. Those numbers are dropping. Right now, Dan and I both, neither of us have power, so I slept on the couch of a buddy of mine yesterday who thankfully did have AC. But they are, CenterPoint has committed to having 11,500 linemen coming in from all across Texas and from other adjoining states to be out there right now repairing the work. And I know there are a lot of people that are facing the heat, facing difficulties feeding their families, and we need to make sure that moves as expeditiously as possible. I'll tell you, yesterday, someone who's a good friend of all of ours, Mattress Mac, opened up gallery furniture in Houston to anyone who needed shelter, needed food. Mac texted me last night, said he fed over 3,000 people who came by and needed food and couldn't get food because everything was closed. And I got to say, that is one of the incredible things about Texans, is that when we face a crisis, when we face a disaster, Texans come together. Texans help each other. All throughout Galveston, throughout Houston, throughout the Gulf Coast, we saw neighbors who just go help out a neighbor. You had a tree come down, you'd get a neighbor come out with a chainsaw and just help cut up the tree and pull it off. You'd get neighbors just helping clean the wreckage off of front lawns. And it's an amazing, I think Texas is never stronger. You see the churches doing what churches should be doing, helping their communities, feeding their neighbors. That we see with every disaster. And that is such an important part. When there is a crisis, there are no Republicans or Democrats. There are no racial differences or ethnic differences. It is just Texans helping Texans, and that's an amazing thing. I'll say finally, the Lieutenant Governor told you he spoke with the President about the Federal Disaster Declaration. John Cornyn and I and the entire federal delegation are supporting the state in having that disaster declaration issue immediately, and then in the next step, working hand in hand with the state officials, working hand in hand with the county judge and the local officials to make sure those federal resources are there for the process of rebuilding. Rebuilding takes time, but at this point, our teams have had a lot of experience expediting these resources to come in and help Texans stand up. And the good thing is, Texans are a resilient people. Galveston will rebuild. All of the Gulf Coast will rebuild, and we'll redo it together. And a big part of the reason is the great leadership of Nim Kidd, who has been on the front lines of disaster after disaster